related issues around ideas of levels of being, which is, I think you're right. All of you have said this, and this is, central to the phenomenology of intelligibility, but it seems to be, contradicted by something that, starts with Scotus and goes through Occam and goes into the heart of the scientific revolution. Is there's no such thing as levels. This is not the reality just is, existence isn't a predicate, and those kinds of things. Now, I'm not mentioning these things to espouse them. Mm-hmm. I'm mentioning them to try and indicate there have been very profound philosophical historical developments that have challenged this phenomenology, and that part of the task, I don't want to be presumptuous. Part of what I see my task of being is to try and take the very best of science and answer all of those challenges in a way that restores confidence in the hierarchies of intelligibility and the phenomenology of connectedness. Now, that's one thing I'd want to say.
But what the Pythagoreans did was to conceive of a hierarchy of beings with varying degrees of being and perfection, from God all the way down to the other extreme, non-being. A hierarchy with all sorts of intermediary beings. In fact, even between, shall we say, the human realm and the divine realm, intermediary beings. Various kinds of powers with various degrees of perfection and imperfection. This notion of a hierarchy of being becomes, in fact, the conceptual model that governs the Middle Ages. This is where it comes from, that hierarchical notion, which found expression in the structure of the church and of society, as well as in philosophy and literature, and so on and so forth, and has carried over into some Christian thinking to this day. It's a hierarchy of being in which there are no gaps. And so we talk of the principle of plenitude. The hierarchy is filled up. There are no places to let. There are no vacancies. Every possible degree of being is taken by something that exists. Okay? Now, that notion has a long history, and you may be interested sometime in looking up a book by A.O. Lovejoy. It's an older book, about 60 years, 70 years old now. A.O. Lovejoy, a book called The Great Chain of Being. The Great Chain of Being. And particularly those of you in history and literature who'll want to have some sense of where this notion comes from that plays such a role in Western thought may want to take note of that book for some time to read. A.O. Lovejoy's Great Chain of Being. Well, this hierarchy of things is an arrangement that enables them to preserve the transcendence of God. That is to say, God is transcendent in the sense that he is qualitatively far beyond this earth and earthly creatures, humans included. But at the same time as it preserves the transcendence, it facilitates the immanence of God. You know, and keeping both these things in balance is one of the issues that arose in Greek thought. Plato's God so transcendent, out of touch with earthly beings, you see. Aristotle's God, beyond the outer perimeter of the universe, and in terms of efficient causation, unable to do anything among earthly beings. You see. But they were trying to preserve the immanence by virtue of the Logos doctrine taken over from the Stoics. Now, remember that doctrine. For the Stoics, the Logos was divine reason, probably impersonal, but some rational, unchanging, rational principle that embraces and permeates everything in existence, so that there are seeds of the Logos, logoi spermaticoi, seeds of the Logos in every particular thing. Now, if that's the case, then you see there are these seeds of the Logos running all the way down, everywhere. It is by virtue of the Logos that the divine being is immanent in every natural thing and every earthly process. Immanent insofar as these logoi spermaticoi, logos spermaticoi, are equated with the immanent forms and you expected me to say of the Aristotelian tradition, and I'm going to say of the later Platonic tradition because there are hints at it in the Timaeus. You see, the forms which brought into the receptacle form physical things. So that it's by virtue of the forms becoming logoi spermaticoi, seeds of the divine logos, okay, that you have the immanence as well as the transcendence. And consequently, evil can now be seen as dependent on one stage in the whole hierarchy of being. That is to say, down here, a dog simply doesn't have the degree of perfection which is appropriate to the human being. Nor does the human being have the degree of perfection appropriate to higher beings. But, by the same token, among human beings there are some who do not live in accordance with that logos, as according to the Stoic ethic we are to live. Human beings who do not, putting it in Platonic language, conform to the form of their human existence. They don't achieve the actuality of that inherent capacity. And evil then is a privation of good. It's a privation of the intended good, of the form in actualization. So you can see the way in which breaking with dualism, a monism is now involved. What you have, in fact, may sound like pantheism. Because if the Logos is divine, if the Logos, that is to say, is the highest emanation from the divine being, if the Logos is divine and permeates all things, then it sounds at least as if the divine is in everything, and insofar as matter has no separate existence, the divine becomes everything. It's a kind of pantheism. Yeah, which was another problem later on that had to be wrestled with. Middle Platonism, because of the Stoic influence, Neoplatonism, were pretty pantheistic. When Christianity assimilated Middle Platonism, as many Christians did, they found they had to make distinctions between God and creation which were not inherent in this emanation theory. And the distinction that finally was made was that instead of emanation, creation ex nihilo is the way to conceive the distinction. Okay? What is emanation? Well, the word itself means an outflowing of being. And the analogies used are of water streaming from a fountain, light streaming from the sun, you see. So if the natural world is an emanation of the divine being, it's of the very stuff of which the divine being is. Nature comes ex deo out of the divine being, rather than ex nihilo. So what begins to take shape on the horizon now, and it's on the horizon still, is a distinction between dualism, okay? Dualism as in the Gnostics, pantheism as in the Neoplatonists, and theism as in Christian thought. Dualism, where things are formed out of eternal matter, ex materia. Pantheism, with things formed ex deo, out of the very substance of God. And theism, with creation ex nihilo, out of nothing at all.